I think it's 4 minutes past the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. My name is Mike Campton. I'm a project manager with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the US. And I'm here on behalf of the Global Power System Transformation Consortium. This is the third workshop in a series of 4 workshops about establishing an independent system operator. I believe some of you may have already attended the past 2. So thank you for joining us again. And if you're new here, thank you for joining us this time around. Today we'll be discussing planning and operations for system operators. And I'm really happy to have my colleague here from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Lina Ramirez, to be presenting today. She is a researcher at NREL, and I'll let her give her own introduction later on. Before that, a few housekeeping items, just so that we can get some good questions and discussion throughout the presentation and for later on. Down in the toolbar in Zoom, you'll see a Q&A button. You can click on that and enter your questions, and we can keep track of the questions that are asked and have them answered throughout the presentation as well as after the presentation. And please, in the chat, please feel free to introduce yourself. Let us know which which utility or which country you're from, so that Lina here, who's new to the series of workshops, can see who is in the room that she's presenting to. And I will stress again that we would really love to have conversation and discussion. So Lina is going to be going through her presentation, but happy to take questions along the way. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box. Or raise your hand and we can call on you for questions. So if that is, let's see, yep, that is all out of the way. I think we can go ahead and get started. But before that, I just want to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded, as well as the fact that the presentation will be shared after the meeting, so no worries if you're missing something. And very quickly, just wanted to let everyone know that this is part of a collaboration between ZESCO, SAPP, as well as RERA, and the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, which is a network of system operators around the world working towards accelerating decarbonization in system operators globally. And so if we can get started here, I think that let's go ahead. Oh, let in Allison. All right, I will hand it over to Lina to kick us off on today's topic.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon. So a little bit of my presentation. So I have more than 13 years of experience in planning and operation of power systems, integrating renewables. And also my research areas are regarding inertia, fast frequency response, operating reserves. And I am helping several system operators across GPSD. I am working with Colombia, Pakistan, India, Indonesia, helping to integrate more renewables regarding inertia, control room of future. So we will see those topics a little bit during this presentation. So let's start. So today we will talk about establishing an ISO, all the planning and operation part. So this is the things that we'll be covering today. So I will pass the GPSD because you know about that. So let's talk about the topics that we will cover. So first, an overview, what is an independent system operator in North America. Later, we will talk about all the planning process, since long-term, medium-term to short-term. Later, operating reserves, and at the end, the control room of future. As Mike said, so please interrupt me if you have any questions. The idea is that this presentation will be more interactive, and the idea is that this presentation help you to solve some questions that you have regarding an ISO. So let's start with this definition, where is an independent system operator. So this is like a comparison between the system operator, the independent system operator, and also an orchestra. So where is the same things that we see here? So in an orchestra in music, you have a director and you have some instruments, and that director is helping the musicians and those instruments to create a melody. But the orchestra and the director is not the owner of any of the musicians and any of the instruments. And it's the same with an independent system operator. So we have an entity that is helping to coordinate all the transmission, generation, and demand to maintain the lights on, but that company is not owner of any generation, transmission, or demand, or any asset of the system. So this is like why they are similar. Like the idea is to maintain the lights on, and for the director in the orchestra is to create music. So let's talk a little bit about what is the evolution of the independent system operator in North America. So let's start in 1882. So first complete electric power system in US, in New York, in the world. Early 19s, so we have some local networks springs up across US, and all of them were vertical integrated. So they have the generation and the distribution at that point. In 1977, so was created the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to regulate all the interstate aspects of electrical power. So between the states in the United States. In 1970s, 1990s, so that vertical model was creating some issues, lack of competition. So we don't have a lot of generation, enough generation, a lot of competition during that market. So at that point, FERC started to create Order 888 and 889 to open transmission system to fair and not discriminatory access and remove all the obstacles to competition in the wholesale electricity market. So it was in 1996 where everything started with FERC, and in 1999 was created another order, the 2000, encouraging voluntary formation of regional transmission organizations or RTOs. So in 1996 was created like the ISO model, and in 1999, the Regional Transmission Organization. So the difference is that the ISO was in charge of the electricity of one state as an independent system operator, but in case that system operators want to operate several states, it is called Regional Transmission Organization. So the independent system operator, as I mentioned, was emerged from FERC Order 888 and 889, where the Commission proposed the concept of an independent system operator as a way for existing power pools to comply with the requirements to provide non-discriminatory access to the transmission. So it was the first point that if they want to connect a new generation, they can do it without any issue so that they can free access to the grid. In order for 90, number 2000, FERC encouraged the voluntary formation of the Regional Transmission Organization with the idea that if that system operator is bigger, they can have more generation, so they can have a better market, more liquidity, and that was the idea, and also to include Canada at that point. So let's start with some advantage of implementing an ISO. This information is according to a California ISO system operator. They study how was the transition from a vertical company to an ISO, and they start to see all the advantages that I will present here. So the first one is enhanced reliability. So for large geographic areas, regional markets promote efficient resource sharing. So as we have more resources, we have more diversity, so we can complement between hydro, thermal, renewables. So, and as the area is bigger, we can have more flexibility and more resources to provide the demand. Organized markets are designed so that an area with a surplus of electricity can benefit by sharing the energy with other regions that through the open market. So let's say that one area, they don't have any resources, or in this case now that is more regarding renewables, so they can share the resources between areas. If one area they have excess of generation, they can share with other areas that need that energy. Efficiency in grid dispatch. So using advanced technology, so the ISO, they have a control center that is with all the technology needed, and also the market is with all the technology needed to drive the incentives to perform the power plants within regional markets to be better than in an area under a monopoly control. So that is an important also point that Kaiso mentioned, that in the past they don't have the advanced technology that they start to have as the system operator is really concentrated to improve every day and to deliver the power with the best tools. There are lower power plants outage rates in a competitive market region because the owners are motivated to keep the plants online during the peak demand. So they try to do all the coordination, the maintenance during the time that the system operator is not needed the plant because the prices are lower. So they have incentives to maintain the power plants in a good shape to provide the energy all the time that the system needed. Better price transparency, so ISOs and RTOs are better equipped with identifying transmission bottlenecks and analyze reliability evaluation and to see what are the more economical ways to invest in the transmission in order to have all the generation going to the places where the system needed. So this is another point that Kaiso find that is different when they were like a vertical company, and now that they are an ISO, they see that they have better ways to have better transmission to avoid all the bottlenecks in the system. In a monopoly controlling markets, consumers and investors are faced with a black box regarding information about prices and location value of the transmission, which inhibit investment in the power grid. So having open information, if you go to the webpage of the ISOs in the United States, they have almost all the information regarding price, regarding all the energy that is transferred between every area, the frequency, all the information that is important to see when you're an investor, that what is the risk that you have for investing in that system. Mike, any question? Okay. Easy of entry and private investment. So ISOs and RTOs develop standardized non-discriminatory rules for grid interconnections and provide an important price signals for new investments. Yeah, so also Kaiso mentioned that when they were like a vertical utility, they don't have like that way that they have now regarding more investors, more generations coming to the grid, and that is because they are providing more rules that they are open, transparent, that any owner, any new actor that want to participate in that market can do it without any issue. As a grid planners, because the ISO also, they are in charge of the planning, they identify the best economic solution to transmission issues across large footprints. So they also see if they start to have more generation in one area and they need to improve the transmission, they should do that planning. Renewable power added to the grid. So Kaiso start to see that they start to have more renewables into the system to complement all the diversity in the matrix, generation matrix. And also they start to see lowest cost of electricity for the consumers. ISOs are seeing robust investment in environmental friendly power generation in the regions, and that is regarding policy too, but also the ISO is helping to be more open to new investors. They have more information and they can participate easier in the market. Market monitoring benefits. So having a market monitor is really important because it can help to identify ineffective market rules and tariff provisions, identifying potential problems and behaviors in the market. So the market monitoring is really important because in that way, the market can see what they need to improve to maintain that transparency and that best power to the grid and in the lowest rate. Market flexibility. So organized markets also offer diverse power products and services that can be used against price rates. So let's talk about the capacity models, those kind of things that the market is starting to implement in order to avoid some price rates in future when maybe they don't have enough resources to meet the demand. Increase and improve price transparency means better contract pricing. So also maintaining a good system to provide all the information to all the actors to the system is really important to maintain and to have better contract pricings. Liquidity in the marketplace. So it was mentioned at the beginning that if the system operator can cover a bigger area, they will have more liquidity because they have more resources to provide the demand. They can have more diversity of resources that can complement in some times that the system requires that. So ISOs have more buyers and sellers that non-competitive markets. Prior to restructuring, only a handful of companies were competing to bring the lowest cost power to the consumers, according to the CAISO information. Market diversity. So this is another, it was mentioned before, so regions with organized wholesale markets have numerous buyers and sellers, but generation ownership is more concentrated in non-competitive regions. Formalized markets can monitor for exercise of market power abuse, as I was mentioned, so the market monitoring is really important to see if there are some market power abuse or some issues in the market that need to be enhanced to maintain the lights on in the lowest cost. Demand response development. So also CAISO starts to say that having an ISO is helping to have demand response development. So ISOs and RTOs provide more information and market data. So the result is more companies that are encouraged to participate in the energy market as companies that they pay for reduced demand on the grid when the grid needed. So demand response bids are very important during the peak periods of electricity use, and it is cleaner and more economical. And I think that you know really well about that demand response can help a lot to manage the system. And if we have that in a market product, that is a good component. So let's talk about the 9 independent system operators in North America. So 2/3 of the United States are served by these independent system operators. So we have Californian ISO, the one that we were mentioning during the beginning of the presentation, ERCOT, or the Electricity Reliability Council of Texas, Southwest Power Pool, MISO, PGM, New York ISO, and New England ISO. And also they are connected with Canada, Alberta Electricity System Operator, and Ontario Independent Electricity System Operator. So let's talk about a little bit more about CAISO and MISO to see what are the things that they are doing and how they are operating the system. So let's start with CAISO, the Californian Independent System Operator. So it was founded in 1998 after FERC issued the orders 8080 and 8089 and become a fully functionally ISO in 2008. CAISO operates a competitive wholesale electricity market and manages the reliability of its transmission grid. So it has a market, and also it is managing and operating the transmission grid of California and one part of Nevada. Second. And this part of Nevada. CAISO centrally dispatch generation and coordinated movements of whole electricity in California and a portion of Nevada, as I mentioned. CAISO market include energy, so the day ahead and real time, and also ancillary services, and the congestion revenue rights to see where the system needs more transmission, that is the congestion revenue rights. So let's talk about a little bit the data of CAISO. So the peak demand was 52 GCAS in September 2022, 239 million megawatts hour of electricity delivered in 2022, 76.2 gigawatts of power plant capacity. That is the data according to CAISO in August 2023, 1,119 power plants and 26,000 circuit miles of transmission lines. So this is the system that CAISO is operating. So this is a picture of the control room in CAISO, and just a summary. So during the inside the balancing authority area of CAISO, they maintain the reliability of the grid. So for all the California and the part of Nevada that I showed before, also manage the power flow between all the areas and oversee the transmission planning process and operate the wholesale electricity market for that area. And also for the Western interconnection, they operate the unbalancing market, and it is the reliability coordinator of all the Western energy system. Let's talk about MISO. So this is the area that MISO is covering, almost in the middle of the country. So MISO become the first RTO. So as we see, MISO is covering a lot of states. So they start in this area and later include the south part. MISO began operating in April 2005, so the market started operation in that year. And in 2009, MISO started operating the ancillary market and combined it in 24 balancing areas into a single area. So the beginning, it was 24 balancing areas, and now is one. And in 2013, the MISO began operation in the South region, this part of MISO. So the peak demand in 2022 was 127 gigas, 651 millions of megawatt hours of electricity delivery in 2022, 190 gigawatts of power plant capacity, 6,800 power plants in the system, and 75,000 circuit miles of transmission lines are the system that MISO is operating. So this is a picture of the control room in Indiana. And a summary, so MISO is focusing in three critical areas. So the first one is managing the flows of high voltage electricity across 15 US states and Canada province of Manitoba, and also is facilitating one of the world's largest energy markets with more than 4 billion in annual transactions, and is planning the grid of the future. So they have in charge all the operation, the market, and also the planning of the system. So any questions until now?
Hi, Lina. Yeah, I think we have a few questions from Musonda. Musonda, would you like to come off mute and ask your questions directly?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I think my first question, I just wanted to find out in terms of, because in your area part of the presentation, you mentioned about the establishment of RROs on a voluntary basis. So I just wanted to find out in terms of if there are any specific requirements for one to be established as a region operator. What would be those, as well as how best is coordination achieved between the various region operators and the independent system operator. Then the other part, which I wanted probably you to discuss a bit more, is on the establishment of the California Independent System Operator. I think in your presentation, says it was founded in 1998 and fully functional in 2008. So I just wanted to find out between this transition phase, what really was going on. I ask this because I think in our case, we have a system operator who is not independent, but operating under a utility who has the other functions of generation and transmission. So I just wanted to find out if that could be a similar case, and in terms of this period from the time it was founded to the time it was fully functional, just a bit in terms of what was happening during this time period. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your questions. Really good question. So let's start first with the questions regarding what are the things that they need to have for being an ISO. So the first thing is that they should be an independent company. They cannot have any, they cannot own any transmission, generation, or any asset of the system. They should be totally independent. So this is the first thing. Also in order A89, they define almost the things that we are talking here. So those are the important things that they need to have. So they need to be covering, like, so at the beginning, they have a lot of vertical utilities, for example, in California, and they join those vertical utilities, but they start to have a process, and this is the reason that they have some years between they establish the ISO and they finish, because at the beginning, transmission, generation, it was in the same company as is in your case, and they need to start to divide and to say, okay, we cannot have generation, transmission, so they start to divide the companies, and it was several companies, for example, in that state. And it is a reason that was a longer time, because they need to divide the companies and have all the legal process to be like independent of generation, transmission, and any demand resource that they have at that moment. So in order 8089, they define some of the qualities that the ISO should have. And the first one is that they need to enhance reliability, they need to efficient grid dispatch, they need to have transparency, they should publish all the information, easy of entry and private investment. So they need to allow all the participants that fulfill the requirements that they have for interconnecting to the system, that they are open, they should publish all the data, all the requirements, if any a stakeholder want to participate in the market. Also, at the moment, they say, for example, in California, the policy including more renewables. So it was part of the ISO, one of the targets, and market monitoring. It was also an important area to establish an ISO. Also to improve flexibility, and it is also because they are joining several balancing areas in one area, so they can have more flexibility and more liquidity in the market, because they start to have more assets to provide the energy. Market diversity, that this is behind joining several balancing areas, and allowing also demand participation in the market. So Order 8089 established those kind of attributes of the ISO, but the most important is that they should be independent and they should fulfill with all the requirements in order to non-discriminatory access to transmission and to the system if they want to provide any of the services that the system is requiring. So this is the answer. Do you have more questions?
Okay, I had a question, Lina.
Yeah.
My name is Patrick. We know that the US has independent system operators that has centralized dispatch, whereby the regional transmission organizations actually, they're the ones who dispatch, but not necessarily the decentralized dispatch, like in the case of Europe, whereby they are not independent. So, but the dispatch is done by the respective system operators within countries. So just try what could be the benefits of this independence as opposed to the Europe model where it's not independent. Because I know in Africa, okay, I'm calling from Kenya. So here in Kenya, we have, or we are proposing to have a regional market whereby the dispatch is not going to be independent, is not going to be centralized, it's going to be decentralized. So what could be the advantages of having an independent system operator vis-a-vis in relation to the issue of the dispatch, whether it's centralized or decentralized? Thank you. Or if those two are connected, they are related?
Yeah, good question. So let's talk about the difference between US and Europe. I think that is an important part here. So in US is more, as I mentioned, so independent system operators, those independent system operators are operating and managing the market as a central dispatch. And also if they are an RTO, is not only for one state, they have multiple states, as the case of mine, so that we see here that they are covering a big part of the US. So for that part, they start to see a lot of benefits regarding price, regarding more diversification and more liquidity in the system compared with the vertical model that they had in the past. And let's talk about Europe. So in Europe is different. They have some TSOs covering almost every country. In some cases, they are covering like more countries as Nord Pool, for example. So they have first the system operator as a TSO, and they have outside like a market. That market could be for country, for several countries. So let's talk about the case of the Nordic countries. So for example, Denmark, they have like one system operator that owns the transmission and operate the system. And they have like a market that is for all the Nordic region, that is Nord Pool. So they start to see that in that case, for example, if they have the market also for Denmark, they cannot have the diversification that they can have join the other Baltic countries. So for that reason, having like a bigger market is better, as we see here, for example, in mine. So also is the same case that they are joining several states. This is more like the central market. This is the case when we have more like a transmission generation. But what happened that in future, when we have a lot of DR, we start to see different models that are more, as you mentioned, are not centralized, are decentralized. And it is because we start to have more DRs in the system. So let's talk the case of AIMO. AIMO in Australia, they are thinking more like not having also ISOs, they are thinking in distribution system operators, and they can have like a framework where the system operator of the transmission is really well connected with the system operator of the distribution, that is more like one is centralized, that is for transmission, and decentralized for distribution. And the reason is because the generation start to be in different part of the system, and they start to see more benefits to having like more decentralized markets, as the DSO can manage the distribution and the generation in those small areas. However, they start to see the benefit to provide some services to the bulk power system, and they have that model that is like a hybrid. Is not also centralized, but it's not decentralized. They have both, and according to the generation and all the transmission or distribution that they have, they decide where is the best model. In other cases where they start to see that there is a lot of DER, there is more DER than bulk power system generation, they start to think more in a full DSO. So for future could be something like that, that instead of to have like a complete ISO for the system, they start to have more DSOs that they are in charge of those small areas, and they can complement between DSOs for having flexibility. So it will be more like an interchange between distribution system operators, as we see here, for example, in Europe, the case of Germany, where they start to have those kind of models too. So it depends of the generation that you have. So if you have more distributed generation, could be better decentralized. But if you have more in a bulk power system, it's better to have the decentralized model because it is the way as the system is operating.
But
And in some cases, mixing.
But it should not be possible for someone who owns the transmission assets, in case of a TSO, to be dispatching on behalf of others. It's not the case. So you cannot have two. You cannot have an ISO, an independent system operator, that is doing decentralized dispatch. Is it possible?
Is it possible? For example, your ISO is proposing a different way. So they will continue with the bulk power system, but for distribution, they will have some DSOs, and they will maintain the dispatch for all the bulk power system, but they start to interchange information and market products with the distribution. So for New York ISO, and the way that they start to see that the system evolved there, so they will have both. They will have the centralized market for all the products that they need to have in the bulk power system, but they will have also the decentralized market for distribution, and those markets can participate also in the bulk power system. So they will have both. This is, for example, the case of the vision in New York ISO. And also there is a new order that FERC issued, the 2222, that is like incentivizing the DER to the system inclusion, to the system integration of DER to the system. And for that reason, some system operators start to think what will be the best model in future, because if you have a lot of DER, they don't see the way to have everything centralized, because it will be difficult, for example, to model all the transmission and the distribution and maintain all the systems centralized will be difficult for the computational studies, because modeling the transmission plus the distribution in a complete way is really complex. And also because they start to see that if the DSO can be in charge of those areas, but also they can provide some products to the bulk power system, and the bulk power system also help with some products to the DSO, they start to see that is the best way. And this is because they will have products for the bulk power system and the distribution. But let's say that for one system will be evolving in that way, that they will have only DER. So for that system, maybe it could be the best case to have only decentralized markets, because everything will be like in distribution in small areas, and maybe they can connect with other DSOs to have some interchanges, but will be like a market between DSOs, a full market covering all the distribution areas. And the other question that you mentioned regarding if in US, the independent system operator can own transmission, no. In US, they should be independent. if they have transmission, for example, as in some areas that we see here that they don't have ISO, is because they have also vertical utilities that they own transmission or generation, and in those cases that they cannot be an ISO because they are not fulfilling the first thing, that they should be independent of all the assets of the system. In Europe is different, as we were talking about, because they have a different framework where the system operator, they own the transmission, but the market is outside of that TSO. Okay, more questions?
Lina, before we move on, I just want to check, did you manage to get to Mosanda's question about CAISO between 1998 and 2008?
Yeah, so that was, as I mentioned, that as they were vertical utilities, they had a process to be totally independent, and they started transition, they have the system operator, but until all the systems were completely divided, generation for one side, transmission for other side, and also demand products for other side, they don't say that they fulfill all the requirements of an ISO, and also having the market monitor those things. So until they have all the information and considerations that were 8089 say 8082, so they were not like full ISO.
Okay, thanks, Lina.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to the planning process. So here we will talk about a general way to do the planning process in an ISO. So let's start with in the X axis. So we have like the time resolution. So we start with the snapshots that are during the operation. We start to evolve to seconds at minutes, and at the end to several years. And in the Y-axis, we have the planning studies horizons. And here we have like all the studies on all the consideration that in the planning department we should have. So let's start with the capacity expansion. So this is like in the long-term planning, where some system operators are trying to see what will be the resources that they need in future for fulfilling the demand. So for that, they need forecasting of the demand, how will be the demand in future, and we are talking between 5 years to 20 years, and also all the policies and all the targets for the environmental that they need to consider. So let's say that in 2015 in US, everything should be net zero. So they are including those targets in those capacity expansion plans. So all the retirement and all the new renewable sources are included in those studies. After doing the capacity expansion, so we move to the resource adequacy studies. So those resource adequacy studies are analyzing if with the capacity expansion plan, we can fulfill all the demand in the future years, taking account some outages and some considerations for the system. And after we see that, for example, that we have enough resources to fulfill the demand, we can move to the production cost. So we start to narrow the problem. And for that production cost, we are talking about that we are analyzing for 1 year, 2 years, every hour or less than an hour, the system to see where are the units that will be fulfilling the demand every hour, or also in minutes for that year or for the 2 years horizon, and to see also how will be more or less the price, what will be the ramps that we will have there, the curtailment, all the unit cycling, if we have some thermal, and also adequacy to see if we have enough resources to fulfill the demand, and to see if we have enough reserves. We have another studies, the statistical techniques that are more for planning the AGC and the RAM products. So for those, we analyze a lot of series of demand and renewables to see how will be the ramp for the next year, next 2 years, and also to define where is the amount of reserve, the secondary and tertiary reserves that the system will need. And narrowing the problem, so after that we see that, for example, some production costs that we start to see low inertia or some constraints. So we analyze those cases with power flow to see that we don't have any congestions in the lines, and also to see that we have good voltages for the system. And we are doing also RMS studies to define, for example, critical inertia, voltages, voltage stability, frequency stability. And in some cases, we are performing EMT studies, for example, in weak areas where we need more defined models to see where will be, for example, the control interaction also between inverters, or how will be evolving the system in case of an outage in a weak area. So all those studies should be feeding, for example, if we see here that there is not enough inertia in some cases in a weak area, so there is like an input for the capacity expansion plan to improve the resources that we will have in future. And the same thing regarding production costs. So let's say that we analyze one scenario where the generation is not fulfilling the demand. So we go back to the capacity expansion, improve that, and again, resource adequacy, and start to narrow the problem. So this is more or less the planning process in all the ISOs. So I didn't mention that for the snapshot or the control room. So they analyze the N-1 contingency all the time, and voltage and frequency stability. This is more like the short term or the snapshot. So let's talk a little bit more about the long-term studies. So the capacity expansion. So are used to identify the least cost mix of power system resources, taking in consideration factors as new policies, for example, the renewable targets, also technological advancements, let's say grid forming, changing fuel prices, and electricity demand projection. How is the demand evolving during the next years? And in many power systems, capacity expansion analysis serves as a key tool for the development of power sector master plans or integrated resources plans. So we see that usually we have those like to define how is the system evolving and the mix of resources evolving in the system. So we have here an example for India. So this is the planning for 2021, sorry, and with the capacity expansion analyzing 10 years ahead, what are the resources that will be fulfilling the demand? So here we have an increase of the demand and all the new resources. So here we start to see a lot of PV, solar PV, wind, also more new PV plants, storage, and this is more or less where is the capacity expansion results. Let's go to resource adequacy. So resource adequacy, according to NERC, is the ability of supply side and demand side resources to meet the aggregate electrical demand, including losses. So for NERC, there is a standard that defines that 1 day in 10 years is the loss of load expectation for US. So this is only 1 day without energy in 10 years is the target. And there is different targets across all the systems. In Europe, they have different targets, in Asia. So this is one example in US. The ARENA definition of resource adequacy. Generation adequacy refers to ability of supply generation to meet the demand. So at the end is what will be the system in some years and what are the resources that will be providing that demand, and to see if that resources are enough for covering the demand that we are expecting in the next year. A typical generation adequacy study will consider the firm capacity of all power generation on a system in a future year and where it is sufficient to cover peak demand. Given the importance on having sufficient firm capacity to system reliability, understanding the relevant range of capacity credited values the renewables. So this is really important. So consider, let's say that we have a PV plant of 100 megawatts. So at the end is not generating 100 megawatts all the time. So including that consideration, where is the capacity credit of that renewable for the system? It is usually is 0.2. So how they consider that in future is really important, because at the end they don't have the 100 megawatts all the time, and maybe during the peak hours, if the peak hours are outside of the solar generation, so they cannot take account that resources. So this is important, that in the past, as we have, let's say, thermal, that if you have the fuel, they can have the 100 megawatts all the time. Here we start to see that with renewables, we need to be more careful and consider how is the pattern of the generation for the wind profiles also, and how is that correlated with the demand and with the peak demand. The questions that can be solved with the resource adequacy. So is the objective of the study evaluating resource shortfall rates under multiple scenarios? So this is the first one. If we want to analyze during, for example, taking account data from years with low hydro or low wind or solar, so how will be the system meeting the demand? Has the system enough resources to meet the electrical demand under multiple scenarios? Again, the same. We are able to fulfill all the demand with the resources that we start to see for the future scenario. And what is the expected and served energy? So it's according to the target for the system. And in case that is not according to that target, we need to have more resources to provide the demand. We have here some examples. This is for Los Angeles 100 renewable. So those are the resource adequacy results according to multiple scenarios. More than 10,000 hourly drought of generation and transmission outages for 7 years of water, and more than 1,300 sensitivity runs. So we have multiple scenarios here, and the target is the red line. And we start to see that for some scenarios, it is not fulfilling all the demand. So for that case, for those cases, we need to analyze in more detail and to see if it's according to the targets of the load energy and service expected for the next years, or if it's according to the targets that we have. Production costs. So as I mentioned, so we start with the capacity expansion, when we see in more general what will be the resources that we will have in future. After that, we go to the resource adequacy to start to see if with those resources we can fulfill all the demand. And in case that we start to see those cases that maybe we don't have enough resources, we go and narrow wind production cost to see what is happening, because that will be every hour, and that will be taking account the future scenarios of demand, and also wind and solar and renewable forecasting. So it is capturing the cost of operating a fleet of generators and simulate unit commitment and dispatch at sub-hourly resolution for a single year, or in some cases is 2 years using a static fleet. And for renewables, so production cost is helping to understand and to see what will be the curtailment, how much reserves we need for the system, the ramp reserves, and also the operating reserves, and production cost reductions using renewables and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So those can be analyzed with the production costs. What are the questions that we can solve? So what is the total cost of the system for that year or for the horizon that we are analyzing? What are the emissions of the systems? What is the optimal dispatch for the system, including ramps and reserves? Those are some examples. So, for example, here we have for several years an optimal dispatch and the total production cost for a system. So the cost in billions, and what are the resources that are providing and fulfilling that demand. And also showing the total emissions So what will be the expected emissions in future with that dispatch that we are trying to forecast for the next year or the next 2 years. So let's go to a specific example. So the things that I explained are in general, more or less the things that all the system operators are doing in the planning side. So for CAISO, they have like this process. So they start with the resource planning. Resource planning start with an entity, a commission in California that is providing the forecasting for renewables and also forecasting for demands. And they start to see how will be the evolution of the system. Later, they analyze the transmission planning. They identify upgrades, if they require more upgrades according to the new generation and the demand that they will have in future. Resource procurement, so observing entities focus in zones where capacity exists or is being developed. So they start to see where is better to have the resources, and they start to approve the generation according the transmission and where they need more generation. Interconnection process, interconnecting process efforts and prioritizing in preferred zones. So as I mentioned, the preferred zones are the zones where they start to see that they can include more generation without enhancing the transmission, or where they start to see that they have more demand, so they have a priority for the interconnections in those areas. So as I mentioned before, CAISO managed a transparent and open transmission planning process. So this is an example. It was the last planning process that they developed that they issued in May 2023. So they started in January 2022 developing a study plan where the state and federal policies say what is the target. So as I mentioned, in 2015 should be net zero. State and federal policies. So the Commission Energy of California is in charge of the demand forecast. Also, the other entity in California, CPUC, is in charge of the resource forecasting and common assumptions with the procurement process, and they start to send that information to the system operator, and they start the phase of the technical studies with that information. So analyzing the reliability of the system, also if they are fulfilling the renewable targets, and to analyze how will be the economics of the system with that scenario. And they publish that information, and this is really open. They are very transparent, and they are providing all the information during all the stage with the stakeholders, and they receive comments, and they include the comments of the stakeholders in all the transmission planning. So for that, they start to publish the study plan and assumptions meeting in February. So every February, they have a meeting with all the stakeholders to show the assumptions that they will consider for the study, the demand forecast, the resource forecast. After that, they start all the analysis, all the simulations, and in September, they provide a preliminary reliability assessment results. They share that information in a meeting with the stakeholders. They receive comments and include those. And after that, they have in November a preliminary policy and economic assessment results showing how is the policy evolution with the analysis that they are developing. And at the end, in April, they have the first draft of the transmission plan. Also, after all the stakeholders review, make comments, the California ISO board approve the transmission plan. And in every May, they start the procurement of the new assets that they need for the transmission. So we have here like an example also for CAISO, how they analyze all the new resources. So if it's in the transmission level, it's CAISO, the one that is analyzing the new resources. But if it's in distributions, are the utilities in charge to analyze what are the new assets that they will have in the system. And in parallel, they have like the utilities, they are trying, or the stakeholders, they are doing all the permitting, engineering, and procurement and construction. So for the interconnection studies, they start to have a lot of resources to analyze every year. So we have here the evolution in 2021 to 2025, when they start to have a interconnection requirements for more than 200,000 megawatts. A lot of, in this case, in yellow is solar, in blue is the energy, the battery energy resources, so storage, and in green some wind. So we start to see in CAISO a lot of storage, and it is due because the storage is the one that is providing a lot of ancillary services and is helping with the ramping with solar. So the market is incentivizing all of those resources to be connected. And this is like doing a snapshot of 2021, 2023, where we start to see the same thing, a lot of PV and a lot of storage going to the system. Also, California, they are doing like a transmission outlook for the 20 years ahead. So they start to analyze how will be the system 20 years ahead, what will be the resources that will be providing the demand at that point. The first study was published last year, sorry. So we have here in the presentation, we have all the links of the information if we want to go to that part. Any questions until now? Okay, let's move to operating reserves. So operating reserves are the reserves that the system needs to maintain the balance between the demand and generation. As we know, the demand is not flat, they are changing a lot, renewables are changing too. So we have that variability and uncertainty in the system, and we need some operating reserves to maintain the balance between the generation and demand. So the first scale of operating reserves is the frequency responsive reserves, that are the ones that are acting after we have an event. Let's say that we have a generation outage or a load trip. And after that, the first resource that we start to see that is helping to maintain the frequency stable is the inertial response. As we start to have more IBR resources, more renewables, so that inertial response is changing to some controls that is called fast frequency response. That is also the same thing, trying to increase or decrease the generation according to the event that we have in the system. In really short term, we are talking here about some cycles, and we can provide that fast frequency response with the storage, as we see later, and also with renewables, with wind, and with solar technologies, with preforming. So this is like similar to inertia, and this is the first response of the system in case of an event. Primary frequency response, also this is a response that is helping after the inertia or the fast frequency responses start. We have like some contribution of every generator that is participating in that frequency reserve to help to maintain also the balance between the generation and demand. So for the services that we have here in orange are services that currently are not included in markets, but later we start to see that, for example, fast frequency response is a market product in ERCOT that is like more like an island. So they start to include those fast frequency response. And we see also in Europe some cases where fast frequency response is required. And also ENSOE is trying that in future, all the resources should have fast frequency response. And primary response in some cases is a requirement of the system, and in other cases is like a market product that is paid by the market. Let's talk about regulating reserves. So it's the AGC usually that we have in the system to maintain the balance between the demand and generation and between areas. and is all the time, every 4 seconds, is sending the commands to the plants that are connecting to the AGC to maintain that balance between the generation and demand. Contingency reserves, so experienced reserves that also can be through AGC, and unexperienced reserves that are called tertiary, usually are replacement reserves that are trying to maintain the margins of the AGC in the normal weights. And this is procured usually in markets. Ramping reserves are really important when you have a lot of PV, that you start to have those ramping during the days. And also when you have like a lot of ramping with load. So we have some products to helping with that. In MISO and CAISO, we can find some ramping reserves products that are procured through the market. Normal operation provide both energy and capacity. So this is more for years to see if the system require capacity. So we start to propose some products. In some cases, there are capacity. In some cases, are energy, as the case in Europe. In US is more capacity. So megawatts in Europe is megawatts hour. So a little bit more about frequency control. So frequency control is the demand response of generation, load, or storage devices to control the grid frequency during normal operation and after unplanned outages. And as I mentioned, so let's say that we have an event where one generation trip, the resting time is the time where the event starts until the nadir, and the recovery time is after the nadir when the frequency go to the 60 or 50 hertz. So the first stage, as I mentioned, is inertia that is provided by synchronous generation. After that, the fast frequency response that is provided by IPR. Later, the primary frequency response that is trying to maintain that the nadir is going up, and the secondary reserves that is trying to going back the frequency to normal values, and the tertiary reserve that is trying to maintain and to have the gap that we need to have regarding AGC. Inertia, so I think that this is really basic. This is the kinetic energy stored in rotating mass of synchronous machines. Synchronous condensers, synchronous generators, and motors loads can provide that inertia. So also load is important to mention here. This stored energy is important to power system when a large generation fails or with a low demand trip, and to maintain the balance in the first seconds to avoiding the nadir to touch the under frequency relays or over frequency relays in some cases. So fast frequency response, let's talk a little bit more about this response. So as we start to have more IPRs, so we are having some controls that are helping to avoid that the nadir is going really loud, really down, and start to trip some load. So for that, those resources can provide in some cycles a lot of energy that help to the system to having the nadir going up. So for example, here in green is when we have fast frequency response, and in red is when we don't have that fast frequency response. Fast frequency response can be provided for multiple technologies. So let's start talking with the synchronous generator. That is the usual inertia that we know in the system. So this is the way that the synchronous generation is providing that inertia. And we start to see that some resources, IPR resources, are providing a better response for the system. Let's talk about batteries. So with solar, so as we see here, they start to increase really fast the megawatts, and they maintain that response for the time that the system needs. So for that, we need to define a storage that can provide the energy for the seconds or the minutes that we need. For example, in ERCOT, they are defining 15 minutes, but it depends on every system and the studies that we perform regarding frequency. And we have also some synchronous generators that are really slow or really fast, and we have different responses. Load response for frequency is really good. So also is in seconds, they can maintain that response, and it can be a market product as is in ERCOT. So fast frequency response for a storage system, we have here one example when we start to have, like in blue, we have the response of the system without batteries, and with red with some batteries, and in green with batteries with tuning controls that they can provide a better response because they are responding in shorter time and they maintain the response. So here also the important and the key message is that having storage is good, but doing the analysis and doing the tuning of the control is really important to have a better response for the system, and also to avoid some oscillations and some problems. Primary response is the action to arrest and stabilize frequency regarding to frequency deviations. So we have here one example of some plants that are providing frequency response, primary frequency response. So we call that like a mirror response, where the frequency is going down or going up. The generators are like responding to those changes, increasing or decreasing the amount of generation. This is like an example of a battery response and a storage response regarding primary frequency. So in green, we have the storage system. This is the response. It is always a mirror of the frequency. And we start to see that is, as I mentioned before, as is based in controls, if we tune really well the controls, the response can be better than also the response that we have with synchronous generators. We need to be careful because the batteries, they have a limit, as well as the synchronous machines, and we need to consider that. So for example, in this case, it is the limitation is going to the maximal value and they cannot continue increasing. Maybe they need to increase more to prevent that the frequency is going down, but they don't have more energy, so they saturate and they cannot provide more energy because it's going to the current limit. And any questions until now regarding operating reserves? Okay, let's move to the control room of future. So
Lina, I
this is
see
yeah.
Musonda has his hand up.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe just one question. I just wanted to find out in view of development of variable renewable energy generation in the system, which then impacts on the inertia of the system. Would it then be ideal or prudent for the system operator to sort of like impose a requirement for the variable renewables connecting to the network to carry some, to some extent, some battery storage, just to ensure that the stability of the system is maintained? Thank you.
Yeah, really good question. So yes, so when we start to see that a system start to include a lot of IPR, so and if the IPR, they are not having fast frequency response to the system, so we start to see that in that case we need to curtail renewables to maintain the synchronous generator to provide inertia in order to avoid like having a low trip with the under frequency relays. But when we want to have more renewables, let's say 100% renewables scenario, so for those cases, we need to start to include in the requirements that the IBRs can provide those kind of responses. It can be a requirement in the grid code, or also it can be a market product. So let's talk, for example, the case of UK. Currently, they have like in the grid code, some new requirements that in one of them, they say that the IBRs can provide inertia to the system through the market. Is optional, but we start to see that some projects, bigger projects with energy and storage, that will be providing that service. So it can be incentivized through the market, or through the requirements. So let's talk about, this is the case of the market product. And it's the same case for ERCOT. They start to request some fast frequency response. They start to act in less than 1 second, and they should maintain the response for 15 minutes. And they allow to participate RBR, synchronous, and also demand for that product. So it's again a product, and it's helping them to maintain the critical inertia in the levels that they need to maintain to avoid any frequency problem. And in some cases, let's talk about the system operators in Canada. They are requiring in the grid code that all the wind plants need to provide fast frequency response. So for the wind plants, it's easy because they have rotation. So with that rotation, they can have for 8 seconds, some extra response to the system without having any headroom. So they are requiring that the controls of the wind plants, they have that capability to provide fast frequency response, as they don't need to be curtailed for fulfilling that requirement. They have it like without any market. So this is another way. Also Brazil and Colombia, they have in the grid codes fast frequency response for wind turbine as a requirement. But when we start to see that is with storage, let's say PV plus storage or storage, usually it is through the market. And going more in purer technologies, so grid forming is also providing those capabilities. And usually grid forming can be achieved with storage. And we have a lot of system operators that start to have in the grid codes those requirements. Example, Fingrid in Europe, also UK, in Ireland, in AIMO, in US, we start to have some NREL also reliability documents regarding grid forming. So I think that across the world, we start to see that first, let's talk about the storage as grid forming. If they have the controls, they can help to provide like fast frequency response to the system and avoiding curtailment to maintain the frequency stable. More questions? Okay, let's go to the last part, the control room of future. So an evolving network requires an evolving operation capability. So this is really important that you cannot have the same control room of the past when you have only thermal or synchronous generator. So for the evolving network, we have more DERs, more PV, wind, demand, HVDC ramping, variability, and uncertainty, lower system strength and inertia that we were talking here. As we start to have less synchronous generation, we'll start to see lower system strength and inertia, transmission constraints, because usually renewables are far away from the load, and electrification. A lot of electrification, EV buildings, so the demand profile is changing too. And for that, we require an evolving operation. And that evolving operation is not only the control room, it's the human factors. We need to train the operators to operate with those new things in the system. Operational data, really important as we have more resources, different resources forecasting, so we need more data. Operational technology, so we need to have in the control room the technology that help to the operators to maintain the balance between the demand and load with the uncertainty and the variability that we are having in the systems. More control, so we need more advanced controls, not only the AGC that was the only control that we have in the past. We need to start to have more control, let's say, to maintain the voltage stable and to do all the outages analysis and many other things that we need to evolve in the control room. Operational architecture, so we need to evolve also in that way. So in the past, we had an SCADA for several years, and it was working well because the system was almost the same every year. But now as we start to have a different system every year with different resources, so we need to start to think in a different architecture for the control room where we can enhance the SCADA and the control room every year without buying a new SCADA every year because it's cost ineffective. And regarding facilities and equipment, so the system operator is in the control room all the day, several hours, so they need to have really good facilities and equipment to feel comfortable during those hours. So let's go a little bit more in deep with this. So this is a framework that is published in the GPSC webpage. It was developed for the funding system operators and other system operators in other countries. We are developing currently a control room for Colombia, for Indonesia, and for Pakistan. Those are the new ones that we will have later in our webpage in GPSD. So let's start here with the human factors. So the first thing is training the operators. So in yellow are the human factors. So they need to be trained for operating a different system with more renewables, with the storage, so how they can manage all those resources, how they can include forecasting in the daily operations. So this is really important, and training every day. If we are changing some tools in the system, doing some training and some cultural changes to help them to absorb all the new information. Monitoring, so this is also for human factors, monitoring that everything is working well, that we have all the data, all the system that we need, and that will be helping to the operator to take better decisions. Operational data and models, so models is really important. We need to have good models for the planning, validated models, and also those models should be similar between all the tools that we can interact and complement, and also do more automatic things. And those models are essential for the control room of future to have a stable state estimator. So this is really important. Regarding operational technologies, so the operational technologies are helping the system operator regarding the decision support, to analyzing what is the risk, the consequence, and the options that they have to provide the energy to the system. So we have real-time operation, the EMS, the BSA, the WAMS, the PMUs facilities, so all that information, how they are interacting, how they are helping to the operator to define what are the next steps or the options to solve all the problems that they start to see during the operation. Forecasting is really important. So as we have more renewables, also more demand changes as the year are connected in the load. So we need to have a really good forecast that can help the system operator to prepare the system for the next hours, for the next minutes, and to see what they need for providing all the demand. Regarding operational simulation, so it's important to have all the tools required for analyzing the system, some minutes and some hours before the operation, also during real time, some controls and some automatizations that help the system operator to maintain the frequency and the voltage stable. And the operational architecture, as I mentioned, so having a flexible SCADA that they can have new modules if they require, more displays if they require, as the system is evolving, and the control room facilities to help the operator to feel more comfortable and to operate in a better way this system. I think that this is similar. So the steps for developing the control room of future are, so first, to analyze what is the current operation capabilities and the risk assessment. So where are the risks that the system operator start to see? What are the risks that they start to see in future with different resources coming to the system? To analyzing what are the gaps in operational capabilities, where they need to improve, and later the future changes in the network and the risk. So if we are having more renewables, how is the inertia changing? What are the resources that will provide that inertia? Is the system strength a concern? If some resources, renewables resources are connected in weak areas, how the system needs to evolve for that. And technology maturity assessment, so to see what are the technologies, the EMS, the SCADAs that some vendors are providing. So to see that the things that are required in the control room are available in the market. And later the roadmap defining where the next steps, the next things that should be enhanced in the control room to prepare that control room for the future, taking account human factors, operational data, operational technology, control, architecture, and facilities. I think that this is more like an example. I think that after that, I think that we can go to questions regarding control room of future.
Thank you, Lina. Are there any questions on control room of the future or the past topics from anyone? Again, please feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. Put your question in the Q&A box if you have questions for Lina.
Okay, just to finish, this is a really good quote for air grid, Mark Folate. So it is possible that this is why we are here. Go back 20 years and people say you are right. The power system, it took people stepping up and providing real leadership and real vision to get us where we are today. That is what it will take to achieve more progress on the road to net zero. So this is my final message, that you are in a way where you need to improve many things, changing from vertical utilities to assistant operators. But if you see that it is a future and you are working for that, so go ahead, that for sure you will improve the system. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Lina, for that great presentation, and what a inspiring final slide and message. Yeah, so I think we can take maybe a few minutes. Folks, if you have questions for Lina, again, please feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute yourself to ask your question. As a reminder, if you joined our workshop halfway through, the presentation as well as the recording of the workshop will be uploaded to the GPST website, and we'll also be sharing it via email with you all after this meeting. If there are no questions, then perhaps we can end early. I know that in past meetings, we've had a presenter from either SAPP or RERA or ZESCO. But I think today and the session on Friday will be a little bit more to the point with just the presentation. So yeah, if folks have more questions for Lina Ramirez from NREL, please feel free to reach out to me or to Lina if you have her email, and we can answer your questions. And then before we end today, just a final reminder, and I'm gonna type it in the chat here, that we have another workshop, the last in the series of 4 workshops by GPST on establishing an ISO on Friday, November 3rd. Same time as always. Oh, sorry, oh, in the chat it says 2:30 to 4. We are, as with this one, we are going 1 hour and 30 minutes as opposed to 2 hours. So please look out for an email about this time change. So again, Friday, November 3rd. 2:30 to 4 p.m. will be our next and final workshop focused on regulatory and legal frameworks. And please use the link in the chat to register for that workshop. Oh, I see a question here. Oh, it looks like Musonda just put in a question. So I think we'll close out with this one question from Musonda for Lina. Musonda, do you want to ask your question directly?
Yeah, I just wanted to find out if the FERC orders which Lina referred to are available to the public, the 888 and 889.
Yes, they are public. So I will find the documents and I will share with Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lina. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining and thank you for your questions and discussion. And yeah, register for the workshop on Friday and we will see you all then. Thanks so much, Lina.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Yeah, thank you.